Marcus Whitman had promises to keep in the West. On a scouting trip to the Rockies in the summer of 1835, he had met Indians who told him they would welcome missionaries to their tribal lands in the Oregon country. Whitman vowed to return within a year. 6 months later, he was back home in upstate New York, struggling to keep his word. To get across the continent in time for the planned Indian meet-up in the Rockies in the summer of 1836, he needed to marry Narcissa Prentice by February and head west by March. He also needed to find a second missionary couple for the journey, a couple that included an ordained Protestant minister and a minister's wife who could provide female companionship for Narcissa. This was at the insistence of the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, the Boston-based organization that would be footing the missionary bills. The American Board, created in the early 1800s by young graduates of Williams College, was the country's largest and most important sponsor of missionaries to foreign lands and to Indians across America. It was controlled by Calvinist ministers, most of whom had been trained at elite colleges and seminaries in New England, where they had been drilled in the teachings of Jonathan Edwards, the Puritan theologian and revivalist preacher who instigated America's religious awakening. Nearly all of the board's leaders, and many of the missionaries they selected in the first half of the 19th century, were members of Congregational and Presbyterian churches in the Northeast. The supply of road-ready East Coast missionary couples was low in the winter of 1835 to 36. What few candidates Whitman could locate in New York and New England had turned him down. That left him with no alternative but to try to wrestle a commitment out of Henry Spalding. By the late summer of 1835, the American Board had accepted Reverend Spalding and his wife Eliza as missionaries. It planned to send them to the Osage Indians in what is now eastern Kansas. They were supposed to leave in the fall, but Eliza gave birth in October to a stillborn child, and their departure was delayed until she was strong enough to travel. It was Narcissa who told Marcus they might be available. Having been born and raised in the middle-class Protestant establishment of upstate New York, she was plugged into the comings and goings of local Christians, especially those who had been chosen by the American Board as missionaries. Narcissa's willingness to point her fiancé in the direction of the Spaldings suggested that she had no feelings one way or the other for Henry Spalding. It had been about 8 years since she turned down his proposal of marriage. She took for granted that his marriage to Eliza, combined with the passage of time and the recent loss of their first baby, had extinguished his animosity toward her. When Whitman first asked Spalding to travel with them to Oregon, his reply was lukewarm. "If the board and Dr. Whitman wish me to go to the Rocky Mountains with him, I am ready. Act your pleasure," he wrote in a late December letter to the American Board. Within weeks, however, Spalding apparently had changed his mind. He began bad-mouthing Narcissa. He said he would not travel with her because he questioned her judgment. It is not known whether Whitman heard about this. Narcissa's well-connected family certainly did. Still, Whitman desperately needed a commitment from Spalding. Without it, he would be forced to postpone his missionary dreams for at least another year. Under deadline pressure, he failed to investigate, or chose to ignore, evidence that Spalding held a grudge against Narcissa and that he was all but certain to become a liability in Oregon. After an early February snowstorm, Whitman chased after Spalding as the Reverend and his wife traveled by sleigh to a nearby village to speak at a Presbyterian church. "We want you for Oregon," Whitman shouted from his horse. The three went to a nearby inn where they prayed together, and Whitman pleaded his case. In a letter, Spalding summarized the argument he heard from Whitman. All the other attempts to obtain a clergyman have failed, and if I refused, the mission to the Rocky Mountains must be abandoned. I felt it my duty to consent to his request.